Man, so Kate literally sat down in front of a broadcast camera last week and pulled off the one move the palace never lets anyone get away with. Look, she had the official script right there. The PR gurus had scrubbed it clean, like they always do, making sure every line was totally sanitized and safe. She reads it over, stares at it for a sec, and then just flips the paper face down on the table. Then she looks up and starts talking about her youngest kid in her own raw words. No cheat sheets, no official sign-off, and without giving a single soul in that palace a heads up. And then, man, she starts crying on tape. Not at first, but about halfway through, right when she brings up Louis. But instead of pausing or wiping her eyes, she just keeps talking through the tears, which honestly felt way more painful to watch than if she'd just lost it completely. And you gotta understand, the palace hates this kind of thing. Kensington Palace doesn't do off the cuff, and they sure as hell don't do crying on camera. Every single clip or photo you've ever seen of those three royal kids was pre-planned, approved, and timed to the second. That's not just rumor. That's been their actual hardline rule for over a decade. So the crazy part isn't even what she said. It's what the hell happened to drive someone as locked down and disciplined as Kate to totally go off script like that. Because behind closed doors, something had been going sideways for months, and people were starting to notice. Events getting wiped from the calendar out of nowhere, last-minute schedule changes, and a little boy who just straight up stopped appearing anywhere in public. Zero explanations. No updates. Just the PR office repeating the same 4 generic words about family privacy every time anyone asked. That total blackout wasn't an accident. William built that wall himself. He fought for it for years, shooting down advisors in his own palace who kept warning him, "Hey, this is gonna backfire on us." And man, did it backfire, in the absolute weirdest way possible. I'm gonna tell you how in a minute because trust me, it's not what you think. Hey, if you're new around here, make sure to hit subscribe before we keep going. This whole situation is still going down, and I'm dropping more updates on it later this month. Look, what I'm about to break down here is just me putting the puzzle pieces together the way I read them. Stick with me till the end though, because the final piece of this story is intense. It comes down to a quiet conversation between a dad and his 8-year-old kid sitting right on the floor of a garden room. First, you gotta understand the rulebook, because this policy is very real, and it's way older than people think. George was born in 2013, right? Within a year, William and Kate locked in a strategy for their kids that hasn't shifted an inch since. The media actually described it recently as a 10-year blueprint just to let those kids grow up normal. That's fact, not rumor. A decade of hyper-calculated decisions about where those kids go, how often they're seen, and who gets access. You've been seeing the results of this for years without even thinking twice about it. 3 kids who pop up maybe 3 or 4 times a year. Christmas at Sandringham, the palace balcony, or a random football match, and those official photos. Kate takes them herself on her own camera and drops them when she wants. Why? Because if you snap the picture yourself, no tabloid paparazzi can sell it for millions. That's the fortress William built, and he didn't build it for some corporate media strategy. He built it because of one nightmare Saturday in September 1997. The guy was 15 years old, walking behind his mom's coffin through London in a black suit with millions of eyes glued to him. And inside of 2 weeks, every single piece of Diana's private life was put on blast for the world to see. Her private letters, her clothes auctioned off, her tapes broadcast for everyone to hear. At 15, William realized exactly what the world does to a royal life once it gets a piece of it. So he spent the last 30 years making damn sure nobody gets their hands on his kids. Every shut door in this whole scandal traces back to that day. Keep that in your head, because by the time we reach the end of this story, that whole strategy completely backfires on him. Now, over the past few months, that system completely fell apart. And you gotta look at the timeline. Louis is 8 now. He's the youngest, which means he's got the least official duty and the most protection. George is 13. His entire future as king is already mapped out. Charlotte's 11 and totally comfortable in the spotlight. But Louis was the one they kept tucked away behind closed doors. Then this year, he just straight up disappeared. Events he was slated to attend got wiped from the calendar. 2 annual family gigs went ahead, and he was nowhere to be seen. It got so obvious that royal fans started counting the days, and that total blackout created the exact crazy rumors the palace was trying to avoid in the first place. And look, to be fair to William, that policy was a masterpiece for a decade, and nobody gives him props for it. Those 3 kids got a real childhood, something no royal kid before them ever had. George got to be a normal 9-year. Old Charlotte's school photos have never been plastered on the front page. There isn't a single paparazzi shot of those kids melting down or having a rough day in public. Contrast that with William and Harry at age 8. They had paparazzi literally camped outside their school gates every single day. William built that shield against insane pressure, and it was probably his greatest personal achievement. Just hold on to that thought. Because the real tragedy of this story isn't that William made a stupid mistake. It's that the thing that ultimately blew up in his face was the best thing he ever built. So the absolute turning point happened at Windsor during a private rehearsal. Kate actually admitted later that this was the exact second she knew she couldn't keep doing this. Look, it was supposed to be a total low-stakes, dry run. A private practice before a real public event. No fans, no paparazzi. Nobody there except the inner household staff. Just a chance for the kid to practice walking and standing around without the whole world watching him fail. Midway through the morning, Louis just stops. He reaches out, grabs Kate's hand, and looks up at her, and asks if he's even allowed to be seen in public. Man, not if he wanted to go. But if he was allowed, Kate got right down on her knees and held his hands. She told friends later that her mind went completely blank. She literally couldn't come up with a single phrase that was honest without completely breaking his heart. William instantly cleared the room, leaving only essential staff, and had George and Charlotte rushed off to another wing. He didn't want the older kids seeing their little brother ask something so devastating. That morning changed everything under that roof. From that point on, it was pure damage control. William's knee, jerk reaction, locked down the fortress. He cancelled every single appearance for Louis on the spot and refused to talk about it. He basically said, "I don't give a damn about missing royal ceremonies. What matters is my 8-year. Old thinking we're ashamed of him." And honestly, as a dad, you can't really blame him for going nuclear. But man, that's also when the whole dam started to break. And the people trying to tell him he was making a mistake were the palace advisors. The exact people royal family members hate listening to. Senior PR aides warned him that wiping Louis from the calendar over and over was going to create a feeding frenzy. You gotta realize royal engagements are public knowledge. They're planned months in advance and printed right in the papers. When a royal vanishes, it's not gossip, it's on the public record. You don't need a palace insider to tell you something's up. You just look at the schedule and notice the kid's gone. The advisors begged William to drop a quick, vague statement just to get ahead of the story. Something official so the press office wasn't left standing there with their pants down when reporters called. And look, the advisors weren't being heartless PR robots here. Their entire job is to look a year down the road and predict which secrets are gonna blow up. They had literally watched this exact same train wreck happen with Kate back in 2024. Remember that? A gap in her schedule. Months of complete radio silence, and suddenly the internet went insane with wild rumors that hurt real people before the palace finally had to come clean. They saw the exact same storm brewing for Louis, and William was walking them straight into it. Look, the PR team wasn't asking William to put his kid on display. They were just giving him a reality check. When you leave a massive blank space, he wasn't gonna let his son's situation become tabloid fodder while the kid was still terrified. And he had 30 years of scars to back up why he felt that way. He was right about how brutal the press is, but he was completely wrong about how to handle it. And that gap right there is the whole tragic core of this story. Because that blackout didn't just stay around Lewis. It spread like smoke through that house and hit the other two kids, and William and Kate didn't even realize it was happening until the damage was done. Take George, he's 13. He's old enough to know something's up, but young enough to think he's got to be the strong one for everyone else. So he decided to be the perfect, calm kid. He went quiet, super polite, constantly helping out, and his parents totally bought it, thinking, "Oh great, George is coping so well," because that's what it looks like from a distance. Then one night, he looks at William and asks if a younger brother could be hidden away from the world without anyone noticing. Man, sit with that for a second. That's not a prince asking about royal rules. That's a scared 13-year-old trying to figure out if the silence means his brother is in real danger. He figured out on his own that his parents stopped telling the truth, and he was trying to figure out if it was normal family secret stuff or disaster secret stuff. Charlotte's 11, and she went the exact other direction. She noticed every single closed door, every time adults lowered their voices or changed the subject the second she walked in. Every staff member acting weird. Nobody told her a single thing, but she put the whole puzzle together anyway, because 11-year-olds pick up on everything, and parents always pretend they don't. And look what she did with it. This detail gets me every time. She started leaving little handwritten jokes on paper next to Louis's bed. On a schedule she had worked out on her own that making him laugh brought him back to reality for a second. So she sat there with a pencil making up jokes just to save him, without bragging about it to anyone. Then, after catching staff talking about the crazy news coverage, she finds Kate and asks if total strangers are worrying about Louis now, and if Louis is gonna have to answer all those people himself. An 11-year-old girl shouldn't have to carry that kind of adult anxiety. But she had to because nobody was telling her the truth. And listen, I'm holding back the most critical moment in this whole narrative for a minute longer. It's a moment between William and his son on the floor of a garden room. If I give it to you right now, it just sounds like a dad and his kid sitting on the floor, and you won't get why it completely broke a future king in two. It's coming. Trust me. Everything we're talking about right now is why that moment lands like a freight train. Look, Kate was carrying a totally different kind of weight, and she was carrying it all by herself. She'd sit there comforting Charlotte, telling her everything takes time, while she wasn't getting a single night of real sleep. She kept her scariest thoughts to herself to protect William, and William was doing the exact same thing to her. Neither of them even noticed they'd completely stopped being real with each other. That's what massive ongoing stress does to a couple. Man, even when you love each other, nothing snaps. There are no screaming matches, no cold shoulder. The affection just goes totally quiet. After a few months, you're basically just two roommates running separate operations in the same castle. And poor Louis was stuck right in the dead center of it. 8 years old. He doesn't know a damn thing about royal protocol, but he can read the room better than anyone. He's always been the spark plug of that family. Anyone who's seen the royals in public knows Louis. He's the kid squirming in his seat, making funny faces on the balcony that would have made the queen double take. Loud, high energy, constantly bargaining with Kate about whether he actually has to behave right now. Being the baby of the family meant he didn't have heavy royal expectations on his shoulders, which was great. But it also meant nobody ever explained anything to him. George's future is set in stone. Charlotte's role is clear, but Louis was just allowed to be a regular kid, which was awesome for him, until he had zero clue why he was suddenly locked away from the world. He felt the whole house go silent around him. That's what hit him. Not some grand policy, just adults whispering whenever he entered the room. All of this finally exploded one night after the kids were put to bed. Kate had written her own statement, by hand, on real paper, sitting alone at night. She takes those pages, lays them down on the table right in front of William, and tells him to read it. Right next to her handwritten notes was the official palace PR draft. And look, a palace, approved statement, is basically PR poetry. It's written by high-paid advisors to say just enough so it sounds like an answer, without actually giving the press a single detail to speculate on. It's a genius piece of corporate spin, every word engineered for legal safety. But Kate wasn't having it. Man, to Kate, that palace PR script was total garbage. It talked around the problem without admitting they were scared out of their minds. It said things were getting better without acknowledging the emotional nightmare they had just been through. It was classic legal fluff. And that's what drove her crazy. William reads the very first line of her handwritten note and instantly shakes his head before he even hits sentence 2. He's like, "Kate, you release this, and this video will follow that kid around for the rest of his life. Are you seriously ready to watch total strangers on television pick our son apart?" He starts getting loud. And then, he just stops mid-sentence. Because both of them realized right then and there that he wasn't actually mad, he was just terrified out of his mind. But Kate didn't flinch, and man, what she dropped on him next is the whole reason we're even having this conversation. She told him that Louis had started thinking he was being locked away because his parents were embarrassed of him. I mean, sit with that for a second. Not because the kid was sick, not because something was wrong, but because an 8-year-old kid figured out, hey, I'm the only one stuck at home, nobody's telling me anything. And whenever I walk in, everyone starts whispering. When you don't tell a kid the truth, they make up their own story. And the nightmare story Louis came up with was that he was the disgrace. Think about how insane that is. 10 years of building an iron fortress to protect this kid. And this is what it produced inside his head. She literally pushed that fake PR draft across the table and told William, "There is nothing in this corporate paper that sounds like our boy, the boy who almost gave up on himself." She pointed out that George and Charlotte were walking on eggshells, whispering every time Louis came up. George was staring at locked doors all day, and Charlotte was writing pencil jokes for his bedside table just to get him to smile. The silence wasn't saving Louis. It was breaking all three of them. And then she dropped the absolute knockout blow. And it came straight from Louis himself. The kid had come to her on his own with 3 simple wishes. He wanted to thank the people who took care of him. He wanted his big brother and sister to know their jokes helped. And most of all, he couldn't stand the thought of people thinking he hid away, because he was a coward. William just collapsed into a chair. He buried his face in his hands, and then he admitted something that is honestly mind-blowing coming from a guy raised never to show weakness. He confessed that all these years of extreme secrecy were never just about privacy. It was about his own deep, hysterical fear of losing control over the safety of the people he loves. Man, that is the single most honest line out of that palace in generations. It explains every single thing William has done since his mother died in 1997. So Kate and William reached a middle ground that night. Kate was gonna speak. She'd keep the private medical stuff private, but she was done lying to the world that everything was fine. But look, there was still one guy who could veto the whole thing, King Charles. And honestly, he's the only guy in that building who actually gets it. Charles gets handed the draft late that night. And the first thing he does is kick everyone out of the office. He reads her notes twice, and when he reaches that part about a little boy thinking his privacy was actually shame, he takes his glasses off, puts them down, and just sits there in dead silence. Man, think about why that line hit Charles so hard. The guy was raised in a family that teaches you to hide your feelings before you even know what emotions are. He was forced into that mold. He forced his own kids into it, and Harry spent 2 decades blasting the family for how much it broke him. Plus, Charles was diagnosed with cancer back in 24, so he'd been fighting his own battle in public over how much privacy a king is allowed to have. He wasn't looking at that page as some distant royal. He was looking at it as a guy who'd been trapped by that same palace rule set his whole life. William walks in a few minutes later, and Charles drops this heavy question on him. He goes, "Is this statement actually helping Louis? Or is it just making you adults feel less guilty?" Damn, what a line, right? But he was dead, right? Every parent tells themselves, "Oh, I'm keeping this secret for the kids," when really they're just scared of having an awkward, painful conversation, and kids see right through that BS. William backed Kate up, but he admitted his biggest nightmare: the second you put a video out there. The media hounds win. They were going to dig up every missed appearance, judge every parent decision, and hunt down every secret they tried to keep. Which, by the way, William called it completely, because that's exactly what the press did. Now, get a load of what the Palace PR team tried to pull. They brought in their own safes version, and get this, their version stripped out the part where Louis personally thanked his doctors and family. They literally deleted the one line that came straight from the 8-year-old kid. Charles shut him down on the spot. Someone who was in the room said Charles basically told him, "If we wipe out the kid's own words, we're protecting the crown and screwing over the boy, and we've been making that stupid mistake for a century." So Charles greenlit Kate's handwritten letter, but on one epic condition. And honestly, this is the best part of the whole story. Louis had to hear every single word read aloud to him before it dropped. No watered down version, no kid talk. Read the whole thing to him so he knows what the entire world is about to hear about his life. And give the 8-year-old the power to veto it if he wanted to. Man, think about how wild that is, an 8-year-old kid given the power to straight up veto a royal statement about his own life, backed up in writing by the king himself. Kate sits down with Louis in private and reads him the full draft. The kid sits there totally still, listening with this solemn seriousness she'd never seen in him. And the moment she finishes, he fixes one specific line. Kate had written that he was doing better. Louis stopped her right there, he told her. "No, I want people to know I'm getting strong again." She made the edit right on the spot. Man, just digest the difference between those two lines. An 8-year-old kid picked up on something an entire room of professional spin doctors missed. Doing better sounds like you're just a patient lying in a hospital room letting time pass. Getting strong again? That sounds like a kid putting in work. That's a boy saying, "I am fighting back, and I am gonna win." He didn't know the formal terms for passive versus active voice. He just knew in his gut that he wasn't a victim, and he wasn't gonna sound like one. Charles signed off on the new line with a quick note in his own handwriting. He wrote that telling the truth with dignity protects the crown way better than hiding behind fake silence ever could. That little note flipped a century of royal history on its head. The monarchy's playbook for 100 years has been, say nothing, hide everything, pretend it's fine. Charles wrote down in black and white that staying silent was actually the thing that was going to destroy them. So the video drops. Kate speaks calmly, thanks the people who took care of her son, and tells the world his strength is coming back. Right near the end, she gets emotional, tears up, and pushes through it, and the palace actually left it in the final cut. And man, the moment that hit the internet, the fallout was instant, and bigger than anyone in that family ever saw coming. Man, the second that statement hit, phones were blowing up everywhere. Palace staff couldn't even process the wave of headlines crashing in. And then the media turned. And they turned in the exact direction William had been screaming about for months. Television channels started whipping up graphics. Some producer pulled every single frame of footage of Louis over the last year and a half, laying it out on a timeline right next to every event the kid missed. By night 2, that chart was playing on 3 major networks. They were running old home movies next to Kate's video, with anchors using that classic dripping tone that basically translates to, "Time to guess what's really going on behind closed doors." And then one television pundit crossed a line that completely snapped William in two. This guy pulls up footage from years ago, just totally normal footage of the family walking to church, and freezes it right on Louis's face. And he starts zooming in, frame by frame, analyzing an 8-year-old kid's eyes on live television, telling a national audience what a little boy was allegedly feeling on a random Tuesday 2 years ago. William was sitting there watching it happen. He literally got out of his chair, put his hand out toward the screen like he was trying to physically shield his son through the television, and then grabbed the remote and slammed the power button right in the middle of the guy's sentence. And he looked at the few aides in the room and dropped 5 words that everyone present has remembered ever since. My son is not entertainment. Man, 5 words from a guy who has spent his entire life refusing to give the press a single unscripted line about his kids. No palace draft, no PR spin, no advisors. Just a dad standing in his living room, hands still shaking, telling his staff exactly how violated he felt. I mean, sit with that visual for a second, because that is the entire story right there. A guy who spent 30 years trying to build a bulletproof fortress around his kids, sitting in his own house, watching a total stranger freeze, frame his little boy's face, and broadcast it to the world. Every single nightmare he'd had since 1997 was playing out in high definition. 4 days after he finally let Kate do the video, he was proven 100% right. That's the brutal part of this story. Everyone ignores. William was right about how ugly the media would get. He was just wrong about how much damage the silence was doing on the inside. Look, while the media was having its feeding frenzy, something incredible was happening out on the streets. And honestly, it's why this story blew up way beyond the usual royal watchers. People started showing up at Windsor Castle, leaving handwritten blue stars on the gates. Cardboard, scrap paper, whatever they could find, blue because of the video. And almost all of them had those 4 words written on them, getting strong again. Within 4 days, the fence line was covered. But look at what people were actually writing. Most of those stars weren't even for Louis. They were for a grandkid recovering from a tough diagnosis, a daughter battling mental health issues, a kid lying in a hospital in Leeds. People drove to Windsor thinking they were leaving a note for a prince, and ended up writing a love letter to their own family. Now, think about the history of that site. Windsor's seen everything: royal weddings, state funerals, national chaos. But this country has a heavy, complicated relationship with leaving stuff at royal gates. The last time people showed up in those numbers was 1997, when Kensington Palace was buried under 10 feet of flowers. And that tribute was basically a public indictment. The country stood there and told the royals, "You got Diana's death wrong, and you are getting her kids wrong." 9 years later, people stand at a different gate, leaving paper stars for a little boy. Nobody planned that mirror image. But you know damn well William felt the weight of 1997 crashing over him all over again. The next morning, a headline hit newsstands with Kate's face across the front page, a mother's voice. Beneath it, the exact phrase Louis fought to keep in the script. That front page did something the palace spin doctors could never buy. It didn't portray the kid as damaged or fragile. It portrayed him as a brave little boy putting a mother's truth over the royal PR machine. Now, it wasn't all sunshine. The commentary got brutal. Pundits started grilling the palace. Why did you keep the public in the dark for months? Explain the missing dates. And look, some made a fair point. If the public is funding your lifestyle, do you really get to decide which parts of your life are off? Limits. The palace PR office came back with a rare, aggressive clapback. A child's life is not public property. Period. They'd given the world the truth, but they weren't going to hand over the medical records. But then one specific line in Kate's video, where she talked about that terrifying moment when things seemed to take a turn for the worse, started firing up the conspiracy theorists again. And right on cue, the PR advisors panicked. They ran straight back into the room and recommended issuing a quick 3-sentence follow-up statement to control the narrative before the fire spread. Kate shut them down immediately. She basically told the PR team, "No way," she said, spilling every scary detail now, would completely trash the exact privacy they'd spent months fighting to keep. She didn't put herself and her family through hell just to give in to the exact pressure she refused to bow to in the first place. Man, that is the exact line where she won the war she'd been fighting with the palace PR machine since day one. She proved she was brave enough to stand up and speak. and then she proved she was tough enough to shut the door and say no more. Putting those two things together is the only reason this worked. And look at the sheer cost of this whole thing, because when you look at the balance sheet, it's heavy. They gave up a privacy policy they'd guarded like a fortress for over 10 years. That strategy is dead and buried now, and everyone knows it. The second you open up about one of your kids in your own voice, you prove to the world that you can talk. From now on, every time they stay quiet, the press is going to point at this moment and ask why. William basically handed the media the key to the castle after spending a decade locking the gate. And what did they gain for trading that away? Just one thing: an 8-year-old kid stopped thinking he was a disgrace to his family. Look, I've gone back and forth 1,000 times on whether that trade was worth the price. And personally, I think it was. But to be totally real with you, plenty of smart people I respect think they made a huge mistake. The counter-argument is that Louis was just 8. Kids get confused. They make up wild stories in their heads, and they get over it. They argue the family torched 10 years of armor to fix a temporary problem that time would have solved on its own. And honestly, that's not a dumb point. It might even be true. But the argument for making that trade, it all comes down to what went down in a garden room a couple of days later. And trust me, once you hear what happened in that room, it's not even a debate. Look, the actual turning point of this whole saga, it didn't happen on television. It didn't happen in a palace press release. It happened on the floor of a garden room, and nobody outside those walls had a clue about it for weeks. A couple of days after the video dropped, William goes looking for Louis and finds him sitting alone in the garden room. No doctors, no royal handlers, no staff hovering. Just a little boy waiting in a quiet room. William sees a chair right next to him, ignores it, and drops straight down onto the floor, so he's looking his kid right in the eye. And he asks him one simple question. He asks Louis how he's feeling now that the secret is out. Louis takes a long pause, and man, the first thing out of the kid's mouth wasn't about the media, or the public, or the palace none of the stuff his parents had been losing sleep over for months. He looks at William and says he noticed his dad stopped talking about royal events every time he walked in. Think about how heartbreaking that is. To an 8-year-old kid, royal events are awesome. It's helicopters, huge waving crowds, Dad being a superhero in different cities. He'd grown up hearing about it at dinner every night. And then suddenly, every time he walks into the room, the adults shut up. William thought he was being a great dad. He intentionally stopped talking about work so Louis wouldn't feel pressured to get back out there. But because nobody explained it to the kid, Louis made up his own reason. He thought his dad had decided he was too weak to ever be part of the family business again. That's the fatal flaw with total silence. You don't get to control what people hear in the quiet. William tried to protect him from pressure, and the kid just felt discarded. And then Louis drops the big one, and he says it like only an 8-year-old can, no preamble, no sugarcoating, just straight to the heart. I heard you crying, man. 4 words on a garden room floor from an 8-year-old to the future king, during the absolute worst week of this entire nightmare. Louis heard William sobbing right outside his bedroom door in the middle of the night. The kid was wide awake. He heard every bit of it, and he lay completely still under the covers, pretending to be fast asleep. Because at 8 years old, how do you handle seeing your dad, the biggest, strongest guy in your world, completely break down? He figured pretending he didn't hear was the only way to protect his dad's dignity. Just digest that for a second, because there are 2 insanely tragic things happening at once. You've got William, a guy who was trained from the day he was born to never, ever show emotion to anyone, standing in a dark hallway in his own house, completely falling apart because he thinks no one is watching. And then you've got his 8-year-old son lying alone in the dark, trying to figure out if acknowledging his father's pain would hurt his dad even more, and choosing to suffer in silence just to spare his father. Man, think about that. That's real love. An 8-year-old Old kid was protecting his dad. He'd been holding that heavy secret for months, keeping quiet just to spare William's feelings. And the only reason it finally came out is because his dad stopped acting like a prince, sat down on the floor, and actually talked to him like a human being. Hearing that completely broke William open. All that stoic, rigid control he'd been holding on to since day one just dissolved. He grabbed Louis, pulled him tight, and told him that being brave doesn't mean you are never scared. It means having the guts to speak the truth when hiding in silence is the easy way out. And man, isn't that incredible? That is the exact same line Kate had been trying to get through William's head for months. Except now, it was William saying it. After hearing it directly from the kid, everyone was fighting over. Louis hugged his dad back, and then he laid down his own conditions. He told his dad he wanted to start going out again, but slowly. No giant royal events, no grand parades, no crazy military schedules with routes and rehearsals. Just a small, low-key appearance where George and Charlotte could be right there at his side. Kate walked into the garden room right after it happened. She looked at William's face, looked at Louis, and saw right away that the dynamic in their home had changed for good. Both of them made a pact on the spot. No more PR releases, no staged public appearances, and zero pressure. Until Louis looks at them and says he's ready. And look, he made good on his word that summer. On the 1st of August 2026, William and Kate brought all 3 kids out to the Commonwealth Games up in Glasgow. This isn't movie script stuff. It really happened. And I bet you've seen the pictures. They showed up as a real family, not as some stiff, formal delegation of royals. In Scotland, they go by the Duke and Duchess of Rothesay, but there was zero royal pomp and circumstance. They just sat in the crowds watching the netball semi-finals at the Hydro. England lost to Jamaica, by the way, and went over to the velodrome for the cycling. Louis was wearing this oversized Welsh cycling bucket hat that practically ate his whole head. At one point, he dropped a fist, bump on Finny, the game's mascot. And that photo went completely viral within 2 hours. And the best part? Absolutely nothing about that day was orchestrated for the cameras. No advance press leaks saying the kids were coming. No official palace memo. No PR explanations, zero references to the absolute hell they'd been through for the past year. They literally just pulled up to a stadium with 3 kids and bought tickets like everyone else. And the public figured out what they were witnessing all by themselves. George is 13 now, Charlotte's 11, and Louis is 8. Right before they walked through the entrance, Louis froze. Charlotte reached over and grabbed one hand. George grabbed the other. Neither William nor Kate said a thing. Kate didn't nudge him forward or try to cover up his hesitation. She just stood back and let him take his time. Then the 3 kids walked in together. Side by side. William stood there watching them, and it finally clicked. Something it took him almost a year of heartache to realize. Going back to normal wasn't about rebuilding the old walls. It was about building something totally different. He'd spent his entire adult life defining privacy by how much he could hide from the press. Because that was the harsh lesson he learned after his mother died in 1997. And look, it was a fair lesson. But he finally had to face a hard reality, that total secrecy might shield a kid from the cameras, but it can leave him completely isolated on the inside. Both can be true at once, and for a while, they really were. Kate learned the other side of the coin. Being open could save her son from feeling like a disgrace, but it couldn't turn into an open invitation for the press to raid their lives. She chose to record her own video message instead of giving a palace statement, because it let her speak the raw truth, and then draw a hard line. And knowing when to stop talking mattered just as much as having the courage to speak up in the first place. Look, Charles said something off the record later that I bet will be the definitive quote of this whole era once it's leaked properly. He said the monarchy didn't take a hit from this. He thought it came out way stronger because they went through hell without turning their private nightmare into a circus. Coming from the king, that's huge. That entire institution has been built on keeping your mouth shut at all costs. And let's be real, that stiff, upper lip rule has destroyed lives. This whole year showed that you can have dignity and be emotionally honest at the same time. Even if the royals spent the last century convinced those two things couldn't coexist. And man, look at Louis. When they finished up at the cycling track, he ran back to Kate and William. He didn't ask if he was permitted to go to another match. He just looked up and asked, "When are we going again?" That's the real happy ending right there. Not the PR videos, not the front pages. Just a little boy taking it for granted that there was going to be a next time. Afterwards, someone showed Kate a picture of all the cards left outside Windsor Castle. She pointed to a note written by another kid, and made sure the staff didn't throw any of it away. She asked them to save the whole display for Louis. William got a letter from an ordinary father who'd gone through the exact same nightmare, trying to explain a scary situation to kids who were too young for the whole heavy truth, but too smart to be lied to. And William realized in that moment that their private battle had touched people way beyond the royal bubble. And Louis, he still keeps one of those paper stars right by his bed. It says, "You were brave even when you were resting." The palace played the rest of it super low key, which was 100% the right call. No big media blitz, no fake photo ops, no rushing back to work, no follow-up interviews. Because Kate wasn't throwing a tantrum or pulling a PR stunt. She was fixing a mistake that fear had created. And she was giving her son permission to see himself as a kid who was recovering, not a kid who was broken. That family spent almost a year thinking love meant building fortress walls around themselves. They walked out of it realizing that real protection means actually listening, admitting when you're scared to death, and letting an 8-year-old call you out when you've got it wrong. The silence worked until it didn't. Then it had to die. And Kate was the only person in that entire palace with the guts to kill it. Honestly, the PR handlers who tried to block her deserve the last word here, because they've gotten off scot-free. The advisors who wrote the sterile initial draft, the ones who cut Louis's personal thanks out of the script, because it ruined the brand messaging, the ones who wanted a second statement to cover their own tails. Every single one of them was just doing their job, and every single one of them would have erased that little boy's voice from his own life story, and slept like a baby that night. Their job is to protect the crown. But someone had to protect the kid. And for months, the only person doing that was a mom with a pen, writing on a piece of paper she was never supposed to have. Hey, thanks for watching the video. Do me a favor. Hit like and subscribe down below. We've got a lot more breaking down this family coming out before the month ends, and I'll make sure you get it first.